Okay, so let me introduce quickly with these 72 slides. Quickly, this is an artwork. This is an artwork. Okay, these are all artworks, and there's consensus. These are very important artworks. Okay, I'm sure you recognize some of them. Okay, that's a brief history of contemporary art. All artworks. Then, 2014, people always credit Google for everything, you know, for playing Go and so on and so on. When Google does it, headlines. 2014, somebody in England came up with a great idea. You know these neural networks that recognize images? They basically played it in reverse. I'm simplifying, you know? Just to see what was in the middle when the neural network is being trained to recognize something. And they asked the neural network, show me what you learned so far. That was a very intriguing thing. And then that's what they saw. That's what they saw. And then somebody started making art with it. I mean, not he. He started telling the network, show me what you are doing. And the network started displaying these things. And then indirectly, it already called it art. That's what the network was displaying. And this is the guy at Google in Switzerland, I believe, who used another trick. He told the network, where there's cats here. There are no cats, there's a cloud. But if you train the network to recognize cats, the network starts recognizing cats. And in this case, recognizing these very funny animals, I don't know what to call them. So basically, and then these other guys came up, this is in Germany, I believe, they came up with this idea. When the network learns to recognize something, it actually separates style and content. That's what ultimately it does. So they said, well, let's use the part that does style, and let's apply style to an object. And so they can replicate the style of any painter, basically. That's not really AI, but somebody built a Rembrandt that never existed, just using Rembrandt's original work. And it looks like a Rembrandt, actually. And automatic music compositions, she's performing a piece composed by this software called Colita at MIT. And then this year, they had a contest where they had 3 prizes for machine-made poetry, machine-made, I don't remember, not painting, something else. Composition, and then another one. Anyway, this is the 4 lines from the sonnet composed by the winning AI that was University of South California. Okay? So, then somebody called it Inceptionism. A Google engineer published a paper on his blog calling it Inceptionism. And then there was, we are on the edge of a new frontier in art and creativity, and it's not human. And then there was, oops, oops, no, I don't have it. Anyway, then there was an auction in San Francisco, I don't remember which month, but it was this year. So
yeah, I think it was
Google and gray area auctioned some of this work, people bought it. I think the highest was $8,000, something like that.
something like that.
So that's it. That's my introduction. If I had not told you that this was done by machines, I think a lot of people would have rather said this is art rather than some of the 20th century masterpieces. Okay? So that's the panel. I mean, once you know that it was made by AI, what next? Is it art? It's not art. We change the definition of art. Who wants to start? Eric?
I'll be. Oh,
Okay.
go ahead.
The art world first.
And I love this question that you proposed, Piero, and I was thinking that there is a kind of extension here from, it leads into these 2 questions: what is art and what is an artist? That there's a famous art historian named E.H. Gombrich who said, there is no art, there are only artists. And when you begin to think about what that means, it focuses attention on what action does art have with us, like, or what action are we taking when we make art? So as I began to try to apply those questions, what do we gain from looking at this as art, or what changes if we call this art? That to me was very exciting, because I thought to know more, to begin to get communication back from the computational things around me, to begin to experience them as another species, perhaps, with different, that I might be able to never understand completely on an empathic level, but where there could be some kind of communication. I thought that was really exciting. I could go on for a very long time, but I will throw that out as a seed so that other people also have a chance. And there's more.
Okay, Mark.
When you look at these slides up here, you are not seeing art. You are seeing pictures of art. Now, the question is, what's the difference? When a computer creates something, the computer was created by a person. And I would prefer to call this type of artwork done not on a computer but on a software machine, which is basically the definition of a computer. But I just prefer the term software machine as something that makes computer a bit more specific. Now, humans create software machines, and humans created the software machine. It's a particular configuration of software. And art and beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So I find this to be art, and I find this to be an artwork because people are interpreting it as something that they can get a connection.
Interesting. Okay.
For me, there's lots of things that connect with both of you. One really big thing that when Piero and I spoke last week for me was being an artist is very much about process. It's about making, it's about engagement with material, whether that's even thinking of code as material, computer code, whether it's making parts, anything, it's that engagement. So how does a computer have that engagement? So it can make something, and I'll just come back to a really simple example, and again I said to Piero last week was, I used to teach photography for a long time. My students would come in with 10, 15 images, and I'd be like, well, where's the work? Which is the piece that you're selecting, personally selecting through the process that you've gone through to say, this is my client's work. And that's not to say that it can't evolve from there, but for me, that was a question, and that's really fundamental to what our practice is about, is being able to select where to stop. So that's one aspect of this, is where does it stop? Can it select where to stop? And the other side, coming back to the software side, is very much art's a dialogue. It comes from a historical trajectory. It comes through a lot of knowledge of what's come before it, whether it's in that paradigm or within that genre. And I agree with you, it's creating from what it knows. So to an extent, that is art, because it's off that paradigm that it's been given. Just as creating practice, if you're a painter, you paint within a paradigm or within a genre or a specific type of painting practice. So I think there's lots of questions that come in that it is art, but that's not a black and white question.
So you would not answer that question up there. I would say, and I would like to take a poll, actually. Is that an artwork? I say yes. Does anybody else say yes? Okay.
Well, it's actually almost 50-50.
But what's one? I think we'll have to know more about what this artwork is about before we can say if it's art or not.
Well, let me give you a different problem.
Can I?
Oh, please, go ahead.
Can I? Bob.
Well, it has to do with clarifying terms. For example, the term is. Which has a famous set of connotations in American history. And there are 7 or 8 meanings. You can look them up on the internet if you like. There are 7 or 8 very distinct meanings for is. And you're saying, is this art? One of the meanings, the one I feel most comfortable with in using this, is it classified as? And then you have to ask, who is classifying, and what are the characteristics of classifying? I raised my hand when you said, is this art? Because one of the things that I do is classify from the standpoint of the viewer, not from the standpoint of the maker. And the best, looking up to the best expression of that on a basic sense is Fred Turner, an American cultural historian. And he invented this wonderful term that says, does this light up your neuro charms? It's a wonderful term. I wish I didn't invent it. In fact, since I didn't invent it, I've already made a big art piece about it, visual art piece about it. Because he says there are some, as people, we're made up of, in our neural systems, all kinds of things that we respond to. We respond to color, shape, and he's got about 15 or 18 of these kinds of things, which can be put together in all kinds of combinations, and they light us up. And for me, that's at least one way that I classify art. That is, it is art.
Let's go around one more.
So one of the questions, I didn't actually raise my hand because I'm still trying to answer the question for myself. And I think the thing that I look for in art with a capital A that I don't find here so much is surprise. Once you've looked at a great number, or the number that exists of these images, you see that there's very consistent strategies. And I haven't really decided yet, because I think if someone is painting black velvet paintings that are going to go up in a hotel room, I mean, in one way they're a human printer for art. When they're doing the 50th Elvis, is that art? I wouldn't call it art, actually, with a capital A. And this might be more like that than it is with what I would call art with a capital A. I don't know yet.
Yep, done.
But lots of artists just replicate what they do over and over. Really incredibly famous artists replicate constantly.
Yeah, and isn't that interesting? It's all contextual. Like someone who sends a postcard with every day of his life with the time stamped for the day. That's very repetitive. But there's something which is really remarkable and surprising about that level of consistency and the dedication to do that. Yeah.
So is that a piece of mail art?
The postcards?
The postcards, yes.
Yeah, it could be called mail art.
Okay, thank you.
Question.
Mail system art. I mean, it's a huge transportation system and personal interactive system to get that piece of art. Just like a computer is fairly complex sometimes. Yes.
Two things. One is that I would want to know what programming went into this system that created it, and how much of it is just repetition of certain things and how much is what we would call imagination. Even the couple of images that you showed had similar shapes in them, and like you said, there was a similar strategy. And I'm wondering also if that gives us an idea of how the brain is working when it comes up with images. If computers are a copy of our brains, what makes us choose certain things?
Piero,
Questions?
in his introduction and the web page and the email, singled out a TED Talk, which has it's a very short, 12-15 minute TED Talk. Hey, can you go to the slide? I don't remember the man's name.
It's a Hispanic. Oops, I just killed the machine. The artist. Oops.
Just towards the end. There we go. Blaise Aguirre Yarcas. Now, if you basically do a Google for this TED Talk, I won't try to answer your questions, but that's a start of I think more than we could answer at this time period.
I'd like to add one thing before we move on to the next question, which is to say the one thing that seems fairly clear from both the video and looking at what I could understand in the inceptions of the paper, this is primarily visual input. And one thing which we should not forget is that the art that we encounter in the real world actually has a lot of haptic, kinetic processing in it, and many, perhaps Piero could speak to this actually, but I think that many people exploring the cognitive realms are thinking that brain is not just this piece up here, but it's the sensations coming through everywhere in our body which interact with vision in all kinds of different ways. So bookmark there, and maybe you had a...
I feel like this is going to be like a room full of assertions rather than questions, given that we're all like, but whatever. Anyway, I to me, like, the element, like, yeah, you see those deep green ones, and you're like, I get it, I get what they're doing. But still, it's visually compelling, and to me, that the surprise and what makes it good is like, what is it about us that just keeps digging that? You know what I mean? Like, it turns it back in. To me, it turned I get that it's like kind of a formula, so I'm over it, whatever. But I'm not totally over it. Like, they keep coming up with new stuff, and I'm like, oh, it kind of touches that like psychedelic button, and it makes you really wonder. Okay, well, they got the formula for it now. So what is it about us that, you know, why do we like that? You know.
You had some comments? No.
I wanted to respond.
No, I still think it's very much about intent, and that comes back to the process again. And I know we are looking at it from multiple perspectives, and you were talking very much about audiences, which I also think is very important. But then coming back to your sort of comment, sort of thought process of you saying it's grabbing you because it's visual, and then just playing devil's advocate for a minute, does everything that's visual that grabs us mean that it's art?
No,
So
I mean,
there's
but
lots
it
of
makes me
things that
question
are coming in
myself.
here.
And why, you
Yeah.
know, like in a way that is deeper than most art.
Yeah,
Like, most
exactly.
art, I'm like,
Yeah.
or yeah,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, I know
and
exactly
you know
what
why.
you mean. There's something there, but
Right.
for me, again, it's like, where's that intent come from in terms of making?
I wanted to get back to your question, and I'm sorry I forgot what the question was. But I was going to respond to that. I try to look at this in a particular kind of way. If an artist creates a work of art and never shows it to anyone, is it still art? And my contention would be yes, that is, because the artist's intent.
Yep.
And the people, you know, we basically, you know, find things in the world, and we find digital things in the world. And I kind of look at this as a question of what kind of art is it? Is this digital found art? Is this art that is, you know, specifically intended to basically make you feel or respond in a particular way? Or is it playing with that kind of, you know, what is the brain doing when we look at images? And now I don't think that that's the intent specifically of the people who created this, but I think that's the intent of people who are showing this art.
You're next, but let me ask Bob, because I see you frantically taking notes.
I'm very interested in the question. I'll just say that one of the ways that most of us are talking about this is classified as what is really art. That's a way of classical logic. Aristotle described it first pretty specifically, and we're and we follow that kind of formal logic in most of our thinking. I don't think it's very useful because it drives us into a particular way, and then we have disagreements about it.
Getting back to the machine art, if I were to take a camera right now and go out to Ocean Beach, and the sun should be setting, and I wait, and I wait, and it's beautiful, and it's beautiful, and then I click, and then I click again, and then I click again. Was it not art before the click? Did it just become art because I clicked?
Well, with what intent did you click?
What happened?
That's another question.
What happens if it
It's
was
a
random?
terminology.
But if I sit to go back to the computer, if I sit in front of the computer and it starts generating this art, and I'm looking at it, and I'm looking at it, and I'm looking at it, and I go, stop. Was it not art the frame before, and it was art after because I stopped it there?
That's
So
actually.
you stopped it. That's why I'm interested in this.
Yeah.
Is to you as a person stop that and said, okay, that something in that image there resonates for me. It feels I want to stop it here.
That's
There's
actually a
some
good question
intent.
because this is
Yeah.
one frame.
Yeah.
I mean, they could have stopped the neural network
Yeah.
1 second before. It would
Yeah.
have been-
Why did it stop?
And who's the artist? Is the artist the person that chooses to stop, or is the artist the machine that developed all of those?
I'm seeing a parallel between this as art and the bead magnets that we're all kind of doing.
What is that parallel? How would you
Because
describe
it's so
it?
arbitrary. I'm sure how it, comes to whatever it puts together.
And why would you say that was art?
Uh,
That's a good answer.
It's funny because I don't consider this art
Uh-huh.
because I think there's an emotional content to art where the artist is expressing something to himself or herself and the viewer, whereas I don't get that from this.
Did you get that same kind of emotional content from John Cage's 3 minutes and 34 seconds of silence?
You mean, yeah.
With that other art?
Yes, and the reason is because I was brought up with modern art
Okay.
and I have a context for it.
Okay, let me. Okay.
Just to speak on that, I create digital art, and I was brought up on digital art. So I feel like we're just going into a different era, like when surrealism and realism separated and became a thing. People had their doubts too, right? And then later on, people recognize it as one of the great styles. I feel like down the road we may end up at the same spot. It's just there may be that generational gap where you just don't get it.
Comment?
Before, because we have very few minutes, I also wanted to make you think about a couple of other issues. As somebody with a background in AI, I was in AI in the 80s when it was not popular. For me, what is intriguing is, all the things about this machine is a human being very weak, because at the end of the day, there's a brain, the brain gets input, the poet sees the moon and writes the poem. Who wrote the poem? The poet or the moon? Or all the connection, So all those things are weak. But things that I noticed in the difference between human and machine is very simple. Who appreciate human art? Humans. Who appreciate machine art? Humans. When we will have a machine that can appreciate what machines do or whatever. And the other one that came out, I think 2 or 3 times, it's a very powerful point actually. We're not the first ones, I'm not the first one. A lot of neuroscientists, when they saw this thing, started thinking, maybe this is telling us something about human creativity. Because we never had a real sound scientific theory of what creativity is. We all talk about it. We presume to be the only species that is creative, but what the heck is that in neural terms? We have no clue. Well, maybe this computer scientist who played the network in reverse, maybe they're telling us something about human creativity. Okay, so there's two more things.
But just it sort of reminds me. The last time one of the last times I remember this discussion is when there was an artist or somebody dipped earthworms in paint and let the earthworms crawl around a canvas, and then people were saying, "Well, is this art?"
Sarah, you had a question?
Yeah, I mean, because that octopuses have been kind of the latest thing in YouTube and whatever, and we're learning a lot about them, and they're chromatophore, whatever. Like, but they can't see, but they can change color, or they can't see color, but they can change color. Like, we're seeing like a lot of examples in the animal world of like that really make me go, God, if my perception were different, if I were an octopus, I'd look at what we consider art and just be like, it's garbage. Like, this is better. So I mean, it does so much come down to what self-resonance, like what we like ourselves, and what feeds us, and what like it's nature. That's what cracks me up. Like, you go to museums and I'm like, I can see better shit going on at night. Like, I don't know. That's a whole nother thing.
I'm sorry.
Yes, I do. Well, actually, I think there's some ideas that relate to what you just articulated from very personal experience. There's a biologist named Ushkal who early on who talked about that idea that each species has different perceptual capabilities. Like a tick can only sense warmth.
Right.
So for a tick, something creative would have to do with what they can sense and perceive. And that, to me, this idea that we live in this world of sentience that touches, but that can never be completely understood or empathized with, is when it could begin to apply here, that things might begin to happen with these neural networks or intelligences that we would only learn about perhaps through seeing changes or comparing something like this. So this is a beginning.
Was more comments?
Just mulling over what we've just been talking about.
I was going to comment on your point about the connectionist networks have gotten through some experimentation, which is usually often called deep mind, which has multiple levels. They go up hundreds of levels even of creating things like this, and those are being used for the driverless cars as well. And what is interesting about them is that generally we don't know how they operate in between, except that this has some insight into one of those things. But it's among the only ones that I think are known right now.
No, it's fascinating that,
Yeah.
I mean, deep learning maybe would have worked, but the reason it got so successful in 2012 is the convolutional thing.
Yeah.
And the
Say that again, Pierre?
it's called convolutional neural networks. Whatever. It's a little different way of organizing these layers, right? And it was just inspired by the cat's visual cortex, whatever. But the funny thing is that nobody really knows why it works so well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
But
It could have inspiration.
Oops, I'm sorry, go ahead. What I wanted to say is that this kind of image is directly a response by the engineers to try and see what the network is doing. That's how these images came about.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's revealing
Yeah.
what we can't actually figure out.
Wait,
Mhm.
I would want to know, can it critique its own work? Can it edit its own work?
Yeah, that's what
Certainly
that's
not.
Essentially,
Yeah,
you're saying.
certainly.
Yeah.
Isn't that part of
How does it
being
make
an
those
artist?
decisions?
Yeah.
One of the things that I found really interesting, I went to the auction at Grey Area, and there was maybe 25, 30 works, all neural network works. And for a lot of people who I was just networking, speaking to people, what do you think about this? And I just find it really interesting. And a lot of people saying like, I don't like it, partly because it's the first time I've ever seen it printed. It's always been on a screen before. So no one has ever seen work like this printed, framed in a gallery context, which for me again made it entirely something else. So you're shifting medium almost. So from what is screen-based, again talking about kind of digital practice, you work in kind of, you're not restricted to the medium that you're working within, but I think that also shifts it into a different realm when you're printing something. So.
Sarah?
I'll try and not dominate the conversation after this, but like, totally, I went to the gray area thing, and I would phrase it differently, like, something about that, the backing medium, it was like, oh, it made me like, it was still good, but I was like, this needs to pop out. Like, I was like, can we felt this? Can we do, like, it was just, something about it was, it was begging to be in three dimensions.
You
You could even do like lithography, like, but it was just begging for it.
I'm kind of confused. Well, quick question. If you took a computer and if you scanned that and had a computer look at it, interpret it, could it tell that it was done by AI or not?
The computer?
Or using the Turing test, or maybe conversely of the Turing test?
You're saying if a computer could scan this and determine this is done by a computer?
Yeah.
No, but then a human being could not tell either, right? If I didn't tell you this was done by a computer.
So could some kind of Turing test be made, something analogous to a Turing test?
Or in a sense, you just invented a Turing test for art, and the computer passed. The computer passed. Because if I had not told you this was done by a computer, I think everybody here would have said, okay, it's work of art.
It occurs to me there's so much of a function, or so much of a focus on the observer function and cognitive ability to interpret what's going on. And the big focus on the brain, I've heard it said, and the neurology of this, but there's, someone said something earlier about there's the deeper subconscious awareness that's part of intelligence, and heart intelligence, for example, and the vagal response of what's going on between the nervous system and the cardiovascular system, and that felt sense of what's intelligent, rather than just being able to map neurologically or think rationally of, is it art? And it seems to me that if there's an openness in the observer or in the creator for this, and it's a fulfillment of what that person is open to, then it is art, in my opinion. If that makes any sense.
I'd love to respond to your question.
I'd love to hear what you have to say.
An observation. I think it is very wonderful. I talked to Robert Irwin, who is an artist about phenomena, and tries in his art to make you pay attention to your own experience. And he's tried to remove all material as possible from his art, leaving things like only sensation, or only light, or only space. And I'd like to ask, in this question, in the science and technology area, an engineering question. The experience of art, what is the signal and what is the noise? So here we have an image. And what part of this signal is art signal, and what part of this image is art noise? What is the kind of medium that is required to get your brain to experience this in a particular way? Is it a picture, or is it light rays reflecting from this projector off of the screen and into your eye? And that's a response as a question.
Final thought? Oh, wow, lots of final thoughts. Let's start back there.
Right at the beginning of the talk, you mentioned something about I didn't understand completely, but the separation between style and content.
Yeah.
What was your statement about that?
Yeah, so somebody noticed that some of these neural networks, when they recognize an image, we are really separating what we call style from what we call content. You know, they have to identify that an apple is an apple regardless of how it's shaped. So in a sense, they separate. So by using the part that understands the style, then they can apply this thing to something else. So you show many Rembrandts, many Picassos, and there's a part of the neural network that learns the style of Picasso. But then they use it to see what Picasso would do with his chair. Oversimplifying dramatically.
Yeah. And that somehow seems really relevant to some of these questions in terms of, is the content absent, maybe? And what is content's role in terms of appreciating the work of art or defining something as art? Does this work actually have content, and how would we describe that or determine that content? How does the machine describe or determine that content? Because I think style and content are obviously very two distinct things, and in a work of art, can you separate style from content and still have art?
We're always talking about the senses. I'm reading now about mathematicians. And most of us, or a lot of us, has gone through the sciences and math. And I'm willing to bet everybody's reached a point when they've seen a mathematical equation, especially if you've been working on it for hours and hours, when all of a sudden you see a certain beauty to it. And there's just a feeling that it's the same feeling you get when you look at a painting. And yet there's no sensuous type thing. Or is there?
There's a neurocharm
Yeah.
that Turner identifies and corresponds to what you're saying.
You are feeling that with your body.
Last
Yeah.
question?
Okay.
So, if I could pose a question. If you saw this exact piece and you were walking through a random gallery and it said oil on canvas, would it be art?
Really? Really art? Really?
Capital A.
I mean, one of the things, they're discussing, I'll make a comment. This is something I learned many, many years ago. There's something that people talk about as abstraction ladders. There's very concrete objects like chairs, and there's very abstract notions like democracy and art. And we have very hard, difficult discussions about what is really democracy.
Okay, on this